The year is 2001. The Kirby anime releases in Japan, with Super Smash Bros. Melee's Japanese release happening a month later. The English version of the anime would then release stateside the following year, titled Kirby, Right Back At Ya. And from this, we had no shortage of Kirby during this time period. Nightmare in Dreamland, which at the time I had no idea was a remake of an old NES game, got released for Game Boy Advance, and was my very first Kirby game, and I loved it. This game was followed by Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, also for GBA, one of my favorite Kirby games of all time. Really, this was a great time to become a Kirby fan. But with all these media releases, surely there was a console Kirby game in the works for GameCube. Right? Well, yes, there were. Two, in fact. A traditional Kirby platformer and a Kirby racing game. Sadly, the Kirby platformer would get cancelled, though many elements from that game would appear in later titles, like the design of the DDD mecha being used as a brand new boss in Kirby's Return to Dreamland, and most notable to me at least, the trailer music for the cancelled game being used for the arena in Return to Dreamland, which has been playing during this whole opening segment. So yeah, only the racing game, Kirby Air Ride, got released, which is the subject of today's review. And, well, I never got this game back in the day, and I don't know why. I'm guessing since Mario Kart Double Dash was a thing and I was content with the Kirby games I had, I guess I didn't need Kirby Air Ride. But being the big Kirby fan that I am, it is weird that I haven't played this game up until now. Even after I managed to find a used copy of the game years ago at my local used game store, and for a really cheap price at that, at about $17 US. Being a GameCube game, something tells me it costs more now than back then. Well, anyway, what's the story behind this game's development? Masahiro Sakurai, the creator of both Kirby and Smash Bros., who was overseeing the Kirby series as a whole at the time, was brought on to be the director of this game, and it would be the last Kirby title he helped develop before going indie. And good thing he joined when he did, because it turns out this game's development hit a bit of a snag, but with his help, the game was rebuilt and completed within 3.5 Wait, am I reading this right? Months? That's a very short development time, wouldn't you say? Though to be fair, a lot of assets were already completed before this 3.5-month period. As for why a Kirby racing game, with all the releases happening to coincide with the anime, Sakurai felt a racing game would be quicker to make. One of the concepts for this game revolves around the idea of drifting being fun in racing games due to the risk-reward factor that it brings, aiming to find ways to make drifting even more fun. This resulted in the game's charge mechanic, more on that in a bit. But a key concept of the game is the idea of broadening the ways to play the game, rather than having players strive to perfectly master it. Needless to say, this is a very unorthodox racing game. So, let's finally talk about it. The game's opening sequence is pretty good. I love it. Short, sweet, and to the point. And this part of the opening right here is actually referenced in Rosalina and Luma's reveal trailer for Smash 4. Seeing as the trailer uses the music that plays during the opening, it's only fitting it should pay homage to it. But let's move past the opening and title screen and get to the main menu and... Yep, this is definitely a menu of a Sakurai game. Man, how is it that nearly every single one of these menus from his games looks the freaking same? Oh, I see. Well anyway, we've got the three main modes of the game: Air Ride, Top Ride, and City Trial. There's also your standard options menu and land mode, the latter of which will not be covered because I have no friends. Each mode has its own submenu, with the most notable option in each being the record section where you can view each mode's checklist, basically game achievements, another feature that would become a staple in games directed by Sakurai. He even brags in his video on the game, saying this was before PlayStation's trophies and Xbox's achievements. At least achievements in a Sakurai game actually unlocks stuff. Shots fired! But yeah, each mode has its own specific checklist and thus their own set of unlockables, which I'll save my thoughts on for that later. So enough with menus, let's get to talking gameplay. The key thing with Kirby Air Ride's gameplay is it tries to be very simple, only using the control stick and A button. Obviously, the control stick lets you control the air ride machine. It's worth noting that the air ride machine moves forward automatically, so you're mainly controlling left and right movements, as well as tilting the stick forward and backward while gliding. Just make sure you aren't constantly tilting the stick forward the whole time, or else you'll find yourself bumping into the ground when you're airborne. And trust me, you will be airborne a lot in this game. You can also flick the control stick left to right to perform a quick spin, basically an attack move to bump opponents opponents and enemies out of the way. As for the A button, it's used for pretty much everything else. And I mean everything else. You want to use those boost panels on the ground? Press the A button when you pass them. You want to inhale a nearby enemy to gain its copy ability? Press the A button, though Meta Knight and King DDD can't do this, obviously. You want to actually use said copy ability? Press the A button. You want to activate any mechanism on the course? Press the A button. But the game's main mechanic from pressing the A button is charging. Basically, it's this game's method of drifting. Simply press and hold the A button while turning to begin sliding, and how much you charge up will determine how much of a boost you get. However, pressing and holding the A button also serves as the brakes, so don't get too spam happy with charging, or else you'll find that your speed has fallen to that of a snail's pace. You'll have to time your A button inputs well if you want to succeed in this game. Heck, pressing the A button while airborne causes you to drop to the ground, which actually has its uses. Don't forget that you can do this. Yeah, as you can see, there are a lot of intricacies to the gameplay despite the simple controls, and you'll need to understand it all for 2/3 of the game. And on that note, let's dive into each mode, starting with... Yeah, I'm starting with this one first because there's really not much to it, and to be honest, it's pretty forgettable. It's basically a top-down minigame version of Air Ride mode, but unlike the other two modes, there are only two choices for Air Ride machines. Freestar, which controls Kirby in the direction the control stick is tilted, and Steer Star, which steers Kirby left and right. Word of advice? Just pick Steer Star. You have 7 unique courses to choose from, all of them having some kind of gimmick thrown in, but the gameplay is a rather simplified version of the normal gameplay seen in the other modes. The Air Ride machine still moves forward on its own, and you can still charge and gain a small boost, but enemies and copy abilities do not appear. Instead, random items will occasionally appear, and picking one up will do what you expect an item to do. This mode is a nice distraction, but it's just not as developed or as fun as the other two modes. So, let's move on. Now this is where the core concept of the gameplay is truly demonstrated. You begin by selecting one of 9 courses total, one of which is unlockable. I'll get into my thoughts on that later. After picking a stage, you'll pick your Air Ride machine. Those starting the game for the first time only grants you access to the Warp Star. You'll have to unlock more of them by completing tasks from Air Ride mode's checklist. Again, I'll save my thoughts on that later. But now we jump into an actual race. Obviously, your goal is to reach the finish line within a number of laps and place first to win. Given how I explained the game's core gameplay, I'd best describe Air Ride mode as F-Zero GX Lite. I'm being serious. And I am so glad I found a used copy of F-Zero GX for the first time the year prior to making this video to even make such a comparison and show this footage. I mean, just look at it. There are boost panels like in F-Zero, and the quick spin technique I mentioned before is basically just an F-Zero spin attack. It definitely has that F-Zero feel, just with a Kirby touch to it. As for the courses, from an aesthetic standpoint, I'll admit that the settings definitely feel, how should I say this? Foreign when compared to other Kirby settings. I mean, there have been unusual background settings in Kirby games before, but I feel these settings in particular will really make you ask, these are locations on Popstar? Though to be fair, this may just be me due to never having played this game until now. But still, all these settings are very distinct from each other. You got a grassy plain, a valley at nighttime, a desert, a frozen landscape with these cetacea rejects, a beanstalk, a volcanic area, a machine factory, an interstellar space tube, and the best stage in the game. Yeah, Checker Nights is my favorite course in the game. The course famous, or infamous, for having its music originate in the Japanese version of the Kirby anime, made a return appearance in Brawl, and then never appeared again, potentially due to legal/copyright reasons. But back to the courses. One thing I'll give them credit for are their layout designs. Since one of the concepts for the game was the idea of drifting being fun, you'll find that each course was designed with that in mind. And I think they did a good job, filling the courses with twists and turns so players can play around with the charge mechanic. Not to mention gliding too, since you'll be in the air a lot. It's not called Air Ride for nothing. Courses also feature the aforementioned boost panels, mechanism switches that can cause different things on the track, grind rails, and of course, enemies. I mean, it wouldn't be a Kirby game without copy abilities. For this game, we have Sword, Fire, Freeze, Wing, Needle, Wheel, Bomb, Tornado, Plasma, Mic, and Sleep. Sleep is a trap. Oddly, a number of enemies seen in this game are ones that I've never seen before or since. Again, going back to the whole foreign feel I have with the game. Like, the enemy that gives you fire is actually an enemy featured in the canceled GameCube Kirby side-scroller, but there are some familiar faces, like Sword Knight. which is the first and currently only 3D appearance of this enemy, as modern titles only use Blade Knight as an enemy to grant sword. Naturally, you can change the rules of Air Ride mode to your liking to customize your races, kinda like in Smash. Overall, I think Air Ride mode definitely gets the game's gameplay across. It certainly tries to be a unique racing game with a Kirby flavor to it. You're given plenty to work with to play around and experiment with the charge mechanic, and the other bells and whistles thrown about, especially copy abilities, make for a very hectic yet fun and enjoyable experience. Yeah, Air Ride mode is good, but now let's get to the best mode in this game. If you've ever played Smash Run from Smash for 3DS, well, City Trial is basically that. Heck, Sakurai even said in the Smash 4 Direct that he carried over the concept for City Trial into Smash Run. You and 3 other players, or CPUs, are thrown into a big city sandbox where you have to collect stat boosts within the time limit, followed by a random challenge. Stat boosts are constantly appearing throughout the city, as well as copy abilities and other items that grant brief power-ups. Your final stat total will be shown once time is up. You can see how your stats are doing during a run. Simply pause the game to see your stats. Once you've unlocked the feature to do so, yeah, quality of life feature isn't unlockable. At least it's still cheaper than Fay Pass. Anyway, most of your stat boosts will come from randomly falling boxes. There are 3 tiers of boxes. Green boxes, which usually grant a power-up item, blue boxes, which most of the time have a bunch of stat boosts inside, as well as health recovery items, and red boxes, which usually grant you a copy ability or a piece of one of 2 legendary air ride machines in the game, the Dragoon and the Hydra. Collect the 3 parts of a corresponding legendary air ride machine to instantly be equipped with that machine, but these are hard to find. Heck, my first few times playing City Trial, I was unsuccessful getting the Dragoon. Man, I guess that one Adult Swim bumper was right about the Dragoon. And yes, this is an actual Adult Swim bumper that happened years ago. But if you do manage to obtain a legendary air ride machine, you're pretty much set because, good gosh, these things are pretty OP. But if you somehow can't get a legendary air ride machine, there's always one of the many other air ride machines strewn about the city to choose from. You start each city trial in the Compact Star, which is nice, but you'll probably want something better. To get off a machine, press and hold A and down on the control stick at the same time to dismount and control Kirby in a 3D space. This was the first time they ever thought to do something like this. Sadly, Kirby doesn't control that great when dismounted. I mean, you can't even inhale, only briefly float. But yeah, to mount onto a new air ride machine, simply approach it to jump on. As for the city itself, it's a pretty decent size with lots of space to traverse both above and below ground, and it wouldn't be a chaotic mode without special events that randomly happen. Sometimes, you'll get a hint to what the final challenge is, which you can then use the knowledge of to prioritize which stats to boost up. Sometimes there'll be a big pillar that you can destroy that will drop a ton of stat boosts. Sometimes everyone has briefly increased speed all at once. Sometimes the grind rail stations are on fire. Sometimes meteors are falling down. And sometimes... so that's why the boss themes are different between the original and the remake. So yeah, Dynablade can appear with the goal being to attack the boss by aiming for... her head. Fun fact, this, the anime, and the trophy in Brawl are Dynablade's only 3D appearances. And of course, once time is up and the final stat total for all players is shown, you'll jump into a random challenge. Sometimes, it's a single race. Other times, you have to defeat a bunch of enemies, the winner being the player who defeats the most. Other times, you're battling other players in a battle royale with items. Other times, it's a drag race. And still other times, it's a gliding contest. And that's the fun of it. Just like in Smash Run, you never know what challenge you're gonna get. And if it's a challenge that you're clearly gonna be OP in due to your stats, well... GG everybody! Though, unlike Smash Run, you can actually partake in City Trial's ending challenges on their own in a separate mode whenever you want once you've played it once in City Trial. Honestly, I'm surprised a mode like City Trial has never been seen again apart from Smash for 3DS. With all the Battle Royale games out there today, like Fortnite, I think something like this should be revisited. Not necessarily like Air Ride or Smash Run, but something close to it. Just don't make it a live service. And that's everything that Kirby Air Ride has to offer. So what do I think of it all? Let's start by talking about the controls. The main function of the A button, charging, is both a blessing and a curse. It's essential to the gameplay, but spamming it is unwise since charging will slow you down and eventually stop you completely. The game does warn you in the tutorial video to not constantly spam it, but remember, the A button is also used for everything else, meaning you have to perfectly time any other action, like using a boost panel or inhaling an enemy, otherwise you'll start a charge, hitting the brakes in the process and thus reduce your speed. And all these other elements, like enemies and boost panels, appear pretty frequently in the game, meaning you'll be pressing the A button frequently, meaning there are many chances to accidentally press the A button to charge rather than these other actions. Even when using a copy ability, the risk is still there. I get that the game is trying to be simple and not complicated, but with all these elements in play, it really feels like other buttons should have been used for those actions rather than have one button do everything. And then you have the air ride machines themselves. As Sakurai states in his video, all of them play completely different from one another. But I gotta be honest, most of them don't play great. Some are incredibly slow, others are very difficult to control, and others take a lot of startup time to get going. Sure, there were air ride machines I liked. Winged Star is probably my favorite of the air ride machines, with its incredible gliding prowess. Shadow Star has pretty good gliding too, plus its attack power. Turbo Star takes some getting used to with the drifting, but is incredibly fast. Meta Knight and King Dedede are a blast to play. It's just so fun playing as different characters other than Kirby. Oh, and of course, I get that there needs to be balance and uniqueness, but I feel most of these could have been worked on a bit better. Unlocking things from each mode's checklist is very tedious. To unlock King Dedede in Air Ride mode, you have to defeat 1,000 enemies throughout your playtime in Air Ride mode. Oh, and get this, to unlock the brown Kirby color variant, you have to finish Drag Race 2 from City Trial Stadium in under 29 seconds with Winged Star.
It is so hyper-specific to such a specific scenario.
Yeah, unlocking stuff from the checklists feels like a chore, and it's pretty evident that this is how you'll be spending most of your time playing the game, seeing as how there are only 3 modes to play. And on the subject of the modes, yeah, as you can see, there's not much to the game. Only 3 modes. That seems pretty lacking. Yeah, I know, racing game, but given that this is a very different kind of racing game with much potential, I feel like there could have been more. As for the modes themselves, Top Ride mode is forgettable. It's not bad or anything, it's fine, but it's pretty clear the other 2 modes just overshadow it. As for Air Ride mode, I have 2 gripes. First, the courses, specifically the quantity. There are only 9 in the game, again, going back to the game's lack of content. And while they're all really good courses, save for Nebula Belt, playing the same stages over and over again gets repetitive, which leads to my second and main gripe with Air Ride mode. No Grand Prix. As said before, unlocking things from the checklist is going to take up a lot of your time. So having a Grand Prix mode where beating each of its cups unlocks something would for sure reduce the workload. Plus, having a Grand Prix mode would justify needing to create more stages and thus more course options than just 9. And then there's City Trial. And it's awesome! Yeah, it still operates on the game's core mechanics, but offers such a unique experience that has only ever been replicated once, that being Smash Run from Smash for 3DS. No 2 City Trial runs will be the same, and that's what keeps me coming back for more. Please, someone, make a game that has this concept and give it online. It would be so much fun! City Trial is also the one mode in the game with the most content variety thanks to the ending challenges being available to play on their own. But that just makes me wish there were other modes in the game made around these modes to expand on the game's admittedly small amount of content. So, why isn't there a lot of content in the game? Well, as stated before, the game had an admittedly hasty development, so there probably just wasn't enough time to create whole new courses, a Grand Prix mode, and anything from City Trial's ending challenges that could have been crafted into its own unique mode. And yet, despite all these criticisms, despite the game's small amount of content, I think the game is a lot of fun once you've gotten the hang of it. I think trying to avoid all the actions that will slow you down by pressing the A button is kind of part of the charm and challenge factor to the gameplay. Once you get a feel for the controls and know what to do and what not to do, this game is undoubtedly a unique racing experience that you won't find elsewhere. I guess you could say this game is easy to learn, but hard to master. The makings of a great racing game are there, if only it had a bit more development time. So, after having a substantial amount of time playing the game, I can confidently say that these 2 Nintendo-produced GameCube racers are clearly the superior racing games. But that's not to say Kirby Air Ride is a dud. It's clear that Sakurai and his team wanted to make something more than just another racing game. As seen with Fighters and Smash, Sakurai really tries to bring home the uniqueness factor, and Kirby Air Ride is a product of that. The thumbnail for Sakurai's video on the game says, "Broadening Horizons," and I think this game does just that. Top Ride mode may be forgettable, but it's not bad, just a nice distraction. Air Ride mode takes the concepts and ideas that were thought up for the game and executes them rather well for the most part. And City Trial takes said concept and crafts something so different, so unique that you wouldn't expect from a traditional racing game. And it really needs to come back one day. Unfortunately, due to the game's short development time, the game suffers from a low amount of content, with City Trial's ending challenges giving a glimpse of what could have been. But at the very least, what we got was good quality. And yes, the controls are a bit rough despite its simplicity, but then again, that's why I think it's so charming. I honestly wouldn't mind seeing a sequel to this game. I do think there are some really cool ideas that can be expanded on, and if done correctly, could give other similar multiplayer games a run for their money. Heck, with all of the Kirby stuff that has released over the years since Air Ride, we could see more characters and locations from the Kirby universe in a new Air Ride game. There's just so much to work with now. But I guess only time will tell when and if Air Ride gets revisited. But you know, I did notice this with the game's intro. While they are both Sakurai-directed games,